Hey. So every time I start a Bridgerton video, I feel the need to disclaim for any newcomers that we've been out here talking about Bridgerton. So if you need any catching up on the lore of the franchise or my thoughts on it, there's a playlist on my channel for you. This video in particular is sort of a follow-up to my video about season 2. Back then, the allocation of screen time throughout season 2 was such a major topic of discussion that I kept track in a little spreadsheet and broke down the screen time of the first 2 seasons in that video. And I thought that was that. I thought that was special season 2 discourse, but I was wrong. If anything, the screen time discussion has blown up even more since then. So I decided pretty early on into season 3's run that I would have to update my statistics, but I also decided to overhaul and redo all of my previous statistics. So this video is just a math update. This is just an unscripted look at my statistics, and I will review season 3 at a later date because I haven't even had time to put pen to paper about my thoughts on season 3, and I have them. I have so many thoughts about season 3, the content of season 3, you know, the stuff that matters. I'm committed to my Bridgerton statistics at this point. I've been doing nothing but staring at spreadsheets for a month straight, and originally I thought that I would update my statistics in the same video that I reviewed season 3, but I've just gotten too overwhelmed by that prospect because I'm so eager to get these numbers out that I know I would rush the review part if I decided to combine them. Like, relief washed over me when it occurred to me that I could just do a little unscripted math update and then really take my time analyzing and reviewing season 3. It's funny because I actually tweeted a warning that I would only be posting one video about season 3, and I meant that in reference to the fact that I wouldn't be making a video about the first part and the second part, but I guess it was technically a lie because I am doing 2. Just a math one and a review one. So if you haven't seen any discussion about the screen time of season 3, that would surprise me if you see any Bridgerton content anywhere at all. But I'm also not going to go collect screenshots and stuff this time around because last season, a bunch of the people whose tweets I screenshotted got mad at me for profiting off of their words, which is not how any of this works. And I'm not doing it because they were right. I just don't want to deal with that again. And the Bridgerton fandom, it's not a safe space. It's not a safe space at all. So just take my word for it that I have seen so many people complaining that Pollen did not get enough screen time. Even more people than I saw complaining that Cudney didn't get enough screen time last time. I think it's almost considered like consensus at this point because every time somebody new comes out with their Bridgerton season 3 take, I feel like they start the video by saying, first of all, I agree with the popular opinion that Pollen didn't get enough screen time. As there were last time, there are petitions floating around to restore the deleted scenes. And last time, I feel like there was more substantial evidence that there were deleted scenes, even if a totally reasonable amount that is nothing to fuss over. This time, I guess some fans went to pre-screenings and claim that there were missing scenes in the final cut. But Nicola herself has said that we got all of the Pollen there was to get, so I'm going to take her word for it. There are numerous TikTokers now who are also keeping track of screen time. I've seen some Reddit infographics as well. Theoretically, I wouldn't have to continue keeping track at all if other people are going to do it for me, but my numbers are probably the most comprehensive, and that's no shade because I have had to dedicate my life to this for a month in a way that I wouldn't have if I weren't posting monetized videos about it. Most people, when going about a screen time analysis for the show, will stick to only accounting for the time the leads spend together interacting with each other. And I do account for that, but also separately account for the time they spend apart, which I think is equally as relevant. In my last spreadsheet, I kept track of the time they spent together and the time they spent apart. In this one, I did the same thing. So what changes did I make? Did I say that I made changes? This is the danger of not working off of a script. I don't remember if I told you. I overhauled the first 2 seasons. I have changed everything about what I did to keep track of the screen time in the first 2 seasons. But why? Well, firstly, because I feel like the categories I chose last time were bespoke to season 2 discourse. A lot of people were saying that the Featheringtons took up too much time last season, so I accounted for their household and their household screen time in its own column. I also had a theory that maybe one reason why people felt there were fewer subplots in season 1 was because the subplots were thematically better integrated with the main plot. So I had a column that was dedicated to leads in subplots where I put moments where the leads were dealing in other people's business besides their own. And that column is also an example of the second reason why I kind of wanted to overhaul my original numbers, which is because they were more ambiguous and more subjective than I think I would like them to be if I'm going to have to continue doing this for every season. I don't necessarily think there's a 100% objective way to go about this regardless, but last time I was trying to be very analytical about what the subject of a given scene was, which led to like more judgment calls than I had to make this time. If you'll recall, on my original spreadsheet, I called the leads together category focal romance, and I called the leads apart category focal overflow. I don't know why I felt the need to make everything so complicated, but this time around, for my overview of each season, I simplified the categories to leads together, leads apart, and supporting cast. Maybe I'll start screen recording now to show you. So this was my original spreadsheet. This is just a PDF version of it. And like, I'll let you in on a secret. This is not very good at being a spreadsheet. I just did all of this math myself. And then I used the spreadsheet to like format it so that I could have a little grid. But I didn't use like formulas in Google Sheets at all. Anyway, I guess now we can look at my new spreadsheet, and this isn't the page I want to look at. I have a bunch of pages down here. You see, I got way more advanced. This is my season 1 overview. Should I make it smaller? Let's make it smaller. And basically, every episode I'm keeping track of the leads screen time together, their leads screen time apart, and the supporting cast. In order to make the spreadsheet do math for me, I did have to make it a lot more sprawling and harder to read. So like this here, actually, let's zoom back in. This column subtracts the start time from the stop time to get a duration that can be their total for that category for the episode. Math, you know, spreadsheets are amazing and they can do so much. And then I did that for each season. So that is the overview tab. Season 1 overview, season 2 overview, season 3 overview. That is where we're calculating the percentage of the total runtime that is dedicated to the leads together, the leads apart, and the supporting cast. Now, I suppose I should describe a little bit more what I mean by those categories, because there would be different ways to go about it, as evidenced by the fact that my numbers don't necessarily match other people's, and my numbers don't even match my old numbers, and that is partially because I like changed the way I was thinking about the categories. But the leads together category should still pretty much match, and it changed just based on like the different judgment calls I made throughout the process. So this time around, when I was calculating the leads screen time together, I was just trying to include every time they were interacting with each other. So some of that is obvious, like if they're having a long sex montage, then that all goes in their screen time together. It got harder when it came to like big group scenes where they are both there, but maybe not directly talking to each other. I tried to be picky about it, and I tried to only include them in leads together when they are looking at each other, talking to each other, sniffing each other, or like if it is just a shot of them both looking away, they're at least like holding hands or something. Like they need to be interacting. Leads apart then is just everything else they do. So sometimes when they are in the same room but not interacting with each other, but most of the time just when they are off on their own, but it does still require them to be like actively engaging in the scene. So I'm not including it in leads apart if Kate is like in the background of a scene where Edwina and Mary are talking. Once she walks up and starts talking to them, then it becomes leads apart. And supporting cast accounts for like literally everything that is not either leads together or leads apart. So it's not just like notable supporting characters, it is also extras, it is also credits, it is also like a lot of establishing shots. And I did it that way because I want these numbers to all add up to the total screen time. I want each episode to have like a percentage amount that it is of each of these categories. Now, when I showed you my spreadsheet, you might have noticed all of these other tabs, and that is why, even though theoretically I simplified my system, I actually made it a lot harder, because I didn't just like take out the ambiguity and like do my original system but better. I also added a bunch of stuff because I started thinking like, if I am going to continue tracking Bridgerton screen time, if it is going to continue being a major topic of discussion, I would really like to know like how much of the lead's individual screen time is which character. I would like to know which supporting characters take up the most time. So I was like, you know what, if I'm going to scroll through the whole series again, if I'm going to do this all again, while I'm at it, I'm going to keep track of every individual character's screen time. So we also have that. It takes a while for these pages to load because I mean every character. It goes far and wide. I keep track of it essentially the same way as I did my other categories: start, stop times, totals. But yeah, like down to the maids and the one episode of villains, the gang's all here. I will say I didn't include like people who technically have names who show up every once in a while just to like fill out the ton. I considered doing that, but I'm so glad I didn't. I had to draw the line somewhere. And there are a few like minor characters that did play a role that I didn't include. So like, for instance, in regards to season 1, I don't know if I can find him. There he is. In regards to season 1, I kept track of Henry's screen time. So Henry is the artist that Benedict meets and learns about gayness, but I didn't account for his wife or his lover, who were technically characters with names and stuff, but I just figured like, let's make it a little bit easier on myself. We'll just account for Henry. My biggest regret actually is not accounting for Kate's dog. What's his name? Like Newton or something? That would have been fun. It didn't occur to me. I guess another debatable decision I made was that I didn't account for Lady Whistledown's screen time. I originally wanted to. I wanted to account for Lady Whistledown and Penelope separately, and then I could do like a special category that combined them to like, you could see the differences. But tracking Lady Whistledown would be way harder than tracking any other characters because I did this all very visually. And so often Lady Whistledown's time is like voiceover. So like if I'm including that and then like times you see a Lady Whistledown like on print, it would be way hard to parse what was Lady Whistledown time. I was just scrolling through the episodes, seeing who was there and who was talking and what was going on. I would have made it way harder on myself to keep track of her. But yeah, you scroll down the character list every given season, you get to the character totals. I also combined these so that I could get like the cumulative screen time of each character across the whole series. Minus Queen Charlotte. I don't know if I've mentioned that. I don't have Queen Charlotte. I would like to someday add Queen Charlotte, but I will not be doing that anytime soon. Now, I guess something of note about the character screen time is that unlike the overview screen time, these numbers don't like add up to anything. A certain percentage of an episode is dedicated to leads apart, dedicated to leads together, and dedicated to supporting cast, but these numbers overlap wildly, not just because characters are sometimes like literally on screen at the same time, but also because I was doing it on more of a sequence by sequence basis than shot by shot basis. So if two characters are engaged in a one-on-one conversation for an extended scene, that entire scene is going into both of their screen time totals. Again, this definitely made big group scenes the most complicated. So rest assured, if a character is like in the background not talking for a while, or it doesn't cut back to them for a while, but you know they're like in the room, I did try to take them out of the scene for a minute. I tried to start their time when they entered a scene and stop their time when they exited a scene. And this by far got the most complicated when they were doing like big group activities. Like it was absolute torture trying to figure out how to allocate the screen time when they were playing Pall Mall. Or when they were doing, what did they call it? Charades, even though it wasn't charades at all in season 3. Torture. Weddings were also super hard because everyone's there and you'll get like these shots of the pews and it's like, do I include this 2 seconds where like Violet's face is down here? And I usually did. So that's actually another thing to note. The most like shot by shot it got was if like a character was performing or there was something going on where there was definitely a character or a pairing that was the focus of a scene, I would keep their time running. So take for example a wedding when Penelope and Colin are getting married, the camera is cutting back to them constantly. You're seeing them react to each other, Penelope walk down the aisle, them doing their vows or whatever. And all of that is included in Penelope and Colin's screen time. It's all included in Leads Together. But then you get like sporadic shots of everybody smiling and looking so happy for them. And all of that, I would just like second by second be like, okay, 2 seconds of Francesca here, 3 seconds of Portia here. Like that's how it had to be. Then my last tab is the pairings tab. So now that we've gotten to Penelope and Colin's season, and besides, I guess, Francesca and Michaela now, they were the only couple who predated their season. They got to interact before their season. They got to have build up and slow burn and all of this stuff. I've definitely noticed an increase of people talking about cumulative screen times. So we obviously can look at the percentage of time allotted to the leads during their season, but it felt important this time as well to like go back and see how often Penelope and Colin were interacting in previous seasons so that we could get a cumulative number for them, as well as see as how much Kate and Anthony were interacting in this season. But I didn't stop at the leading couples. I took any like romantic, potentially romantic pairing, and I accounted for all of that so we could have cumulative numbers for all of the romances. Though I will say I wasn't really sure where to draw the line here, because part of me wanted to include like shippable pairings that don't really have any canonically romantic content in the show. And I also think it could be really fun and interesting to see how much time canonically platonic pairings are spending together. Like how much time do Eloise and Penelope get versus Eloise and Benedict? How much time does Lady Danbury get with Violet versus with Charlotte? But as I considered doing all of that, I just realized that at a certain point I would have to account for like any two characters that interact, because how do you choose like what the important relationships are? So where I drew the line was canonically romantic, potentially shippable pairings. So that means no popular fan pairings like Penelope and Eloise, like Eloise and Footman John. And it also means no like canonical couples in the show that nobody would like conceivably ship, that they don't really put any effort in the show to like making a rootable pairing. So an example of that would be Portia and Archibald. I didn't keep track of their screen time together because I don't think anybody's like, woo, like a Portia and Archibald. And anyway, my rules for tracking these were pretty much the same rules for tracking leads together. So this is when these people are interacting, not when they just happen to be sharing space. You know, they need to be talking or looking at each other or something along those lines. Well, this is taking longer than anticipated. So anyway, if you go to the front of all of my sheets, there's this big one where I've just added up all of the totals to get like cumulative numbers and all of this stuff. And I will link this in the description so you can go check my work, look at the spreadsheet, see what's up with all of this stuff. But I also kind of simplified all of the information into this document. I'll zoom on in. This is where we can go over like the important information. And I will say originally I wanted to make like cute infographics out of this information, but I just like, I can't bring myself to spend any more time on this than I have already. I'm just so excited for you to have my numbers and for me to like stop for a minute. I need a break from the spreadsheets, man. I can't do this anymore. But if you guys want to make infographics out of this intel, go ahead, because I'll link this document in the description as well. But right now, we will go over the information together. So the title is Bridgerton Screen Time Stats, and then this characters list is the cumulative is a hard word to say, cumulative screen time of every individual character ranked by the most to the least. So the character with the most screen time of all of the characters is Penelope, which I kind of anticipated. And it does like add up for Penelope to be the most relevant character, given she's Lady Whistledown. It does feel a little funny that it's not one of the original Bridgerton siblings, but like maybe that's for the better, so that like the show hasn't chosen a favorite Bridgerton sibling. They chose a favorite love interest, I guess. And that's why it's a little bit hypocritical and I think funny how many people are like, Penelope's being snubbed, like people accusing the new showrunner of being like fat phobic, and like all of this like stuff is so silly to me when she has gotten like treated. She like has so much relevance, she's gotten to do so much, and I've actually seen a lot less negativity surrounding Penelope than I did before. I've seen a lot more positivity about Penelope this year and a lot more negativity about Colin in particular. I will say it's interesting that Daphne takes up the third spot despite only being in 2 seasons and having a reduced role in season 2, sort of like how Anthony had a reduced role in season 3. And that is like solely due to her season 1 showing. Like we'll get there. I did not realize how much disparity there was between Daphne and Simon's screen time in that season. Like it's wild. It's wild stuff. Then you get Colin, somebody who's also been there for all 3 seasons. Then you get Kate, only been there for 2, had the reduced role in season 3. And then what's really interesting is that Simon is the only lead that isn't in like the top ones, who gets outdone by non-leads, which does make sense having only been in 1 season. But like we definitely have to flag the fact that it is the 2 non-white leads that are trailing everybody else. This is something I think I talked about in my original Bridgerton video, that it can feel like the characters of color are sidelined because of who they chose to cast as characters of color. So like logically it does make sense to me that Penelope would have the most screen time, but then you have to wonder, like, if they're casting so many love interests as non-white people, why was the only one, I guess besides like Philip, who got to like be there from the beginning, who got to predate their season, why was that the one that was casted as a white person, right? I guess we have Michaela now, but she's She's last, I think. 49 seconds of Michaela's screen time. She'll catch up. We're pulling for her. But yeah, for sure. It's interesting that Kate and Simon fall last on here. And I think out of like all of the leads, if you can reasonably argue that anybody was like snubbed, that they deserved better, I think it's Simon. First of all, because the content of their story like victimized Simon and didn't even really acknowledge it. Second of all, because he got so much less screen time than Daphne. We'll get there. Anyway, Violet and Eloise being the ones who outdo a lead, makes sense. Violet, because she's always going to be the mother of a lead, so she'll always have like something to do. Eloise, I think just because the show it's invested in Eloise. They always let her have like things to do. I guess once you get past Simon, you see Portia, Agatha. Benedict falls kind of behind. You would expect him to be comparable to Eloise, but I think they really struggle with like what to do with Benedict. So every season they just have him hook up with somebody new. Then Edwina, kind of an impressive showing for only having been in one season. Then Charlotte. Then Cressida. Cressida, I was surprised makes like top 15 because I know she's very relevant in season 3, but I kind of forgot how present she is in season 1. Francesca finally catching up. She had a lot of catching up to do this season, wasn't not super around for the first 2. Marina, very interesting how high Marina remains when she really was only super present in the first season. I'm really nervous for Marina, guys, because obviously the actress left and more power to her. I am sad that she didn't have a good experience, but I think that gives the creators a little bit more motivation to just kill her off. And like, that is the last thing I want. Like, she has lived such a tragic life. I want them to be like, she ran away. That you can't kill her. I would be so mad. And I don't know how they're gonna do Eloise's season, period. Like, I don't know how they're gonna make that work. Where were we? Prudence has a leg up on Philippa because Philippa was not super present throughout the second season. Will down here, he's hanging in there. Jack, Mary, Philippa, Genevieve, Araminta, that's Cressida's mom. As you can see, I went with just first names, and that's because there are so many like titles and people who like change their last names and just things that I didn't want to deal with. So I went first names. Hyacinth has a leg up on Gregory, which is interesting. It's funny looking at those two with like their 20 minutes cumulatively, and that is built like brick by brick, like 1 minute per episode. I love Hyacinth and Gregory. They just show up to like cause a little trouble for like one scene per episode. They're so cute. I love them. John, Alice, Gregory, Marcus, Alfred is Debling. I think he's usually called Debling, but I went with first names. Tilly, Sienna. You see a lot of like the one-time love interest people one season. Miss Varley is definitely the most present maid. She is doing stuff a lot of the time. She actually does stuff. Friedrich? I think it's Friedrich. And actually, fun fact about Friedrich, for some reason in my mind, he was in season 2 because Charlotte tells Edwina about him. She's like, you should hook up with my nephew who like was in last season. And in my memory, for some reason, he showed up and they danced or something. So I had like in my notes when I was tracking the screen time for season 2, I had a whole section for him and I was like, where's Friedrich? Anyway, Brimsley had a big uptick after Queen Charlotte, which I think is interesting. Archibald is the original Lord Featherington. Theo, Albion is Philippa's husband. Harry is Prudence's husband. Harry did a lot of catching up because Albion's been there since season 1. Harry did a lot of catching up in season 3. I'm surprised they're right next to each other like that, actually. Rose was Daphne's maid in season 1. Mrs. Wilson is a maid that runs around the Bridgerton house. Who's Henry? Oh yeah, I was just explaining who Henry is. It's the artist from season 1. Okay. Thomas is the guy Kate dates. I feel like these bottom ones I just have to explain who they even are. Paul, Biking, Duke of Hastings, Simon's dad. He doesn't have a first name. Miss Coulson is the maid at Simon's house. Why am I explaining all of this? Lord Cowper, Philip, George, King George that is, Edmund. Tessa is the girl Benedict hooks up with in season 2. Jeffries is Simon's footman. Footman John, who I not relevant enough to include, but I included him because he like has like stands. Like Footman John is like surprisingly relevant in the fan space for some reason. And then Michaela hanging in there in last place. Let's go, Michaela. Now let's scroll down to pairings. And again, this is cumulative across the whole series. So what's crazy is despite only being in one season, Daphne and Simon still take the lead on a pairings romantic screen time together. So there definitely is like truth to the idea that the leads spend more time together in season 1. I remember when I put out my season 2 video and I basically said, I think I've disproven that there were more subplots in season 1. People were like, no, you kind of proved that there is this disparity because Simon and Daphne spent a lot more time together than Kate and Anthony. And that's true, that is a difference, but I just think that the time they spend apart is also so relevant. And they decided to pace Kate and Anthony's story in a way where they didn't get together until the end, which I think their story was made all the better for. And so it just didn't work out that they could have like a 20-minute sex montage. I don't know. Anyway, now that we have a 3rd season to work off of, Colin and Penelope and Kate and Anthony have like a super similar amount of screen time together. So I think that's the rhythm the show is striving for now. But yeah, Simon and Daphne do take the lead, Colin and Penelope 2nd place, and Anthony and Kate in last place. But these are pretty close numbers, 104, 100, 92. Obviously, this is all cumulative, so it does mean that Simon and Daphne got like a significant boost in their first season, their only season. And I honestly think the 10-minute difference, or I guess 8-minute difference between Cantony and Pollen is just the extra season that Colin and Penelope have, because I think besides that extra season it all shakes out pretty evenly. But yeah, I do think mathematically speaking, if any stans of a couple have a right to say that their leads don't get enough screen time, it's Anthony and Kate, because like mathematically they've had the least. So 4th is Anthony and Edwina, which makes sense. That's definitely the most relevant like competing love interest. I am shocked Portia and Jack made 5th. They have a lot of screen time that isn't super romantic, but is still together where they are talking to each other. So like they kiss towards the end of their season, and that's sort of why I even put them here. But they have a lot of scenes throughout season 2 that are them like fighting about money or something. And that's another thing to note. I actually should have said this before we started going over any of the numbers, is that not all screen time is like created equal. It is the content that matters. And I'm not saying there's nothing to be gleaned from analyzing screen time. And that's why I will continue to keep track of screen time. Like I think there is stuff to analyze there, like, and it is interesting, but it is not the full story. It's actually a point my new mutual Paige made on TikTok. She said you have to consider that part of Daphne and Simon's screen time in their first place here is the wildly controversial marital rape arc. Is that more valuable or better to you than like the screen time that Anthony has apart from Kate, where he's like dealing with his childhood trauma? Is that better or more worthwhile to you than the screen time Penelope has absent of Colin, where she's like doing Lady Whistledown stuff? Like content matters a lot, actually more than screen time. Anyway, I was also surprised how much time Benedict and Tilly got. Penelope and Alfred, Francesca and John, only 15 minutes. People were like, Colin and Penelope had to share their season with Francesca and John, and it's like, yeah, they got married in the same season, but they had 15 minutes. Colin and Marina, Will and Alice, Anthony and Sienna, Daphne and Friedrich, Eloise and Theo, Violet and Marcus, Philippa and Albion, Prudence and Harry, Benedict and Paul, Kate and Thomas, Tilly and Paul, Benedict and Tessa. Benedict is getting around. Then down here, Charlotte and George. I would like someday to account for Queen Charlotte and then see cumulatively how much they have, because I did actually do one episode of Queen Charlotte. I was going to go in order like prequel, season 1, season 2, season 3 when I did this. And then after I finished the first episode of Queen Charlotte, I realized how hard the system of going character by character and doing all of this was going to be. So I was like, let's skip Queen Charlotte for now so that I have the option of just stopping at 3, and I'm really glad I did that. But what I discovered from Queen Charlotte was that show is a lot heavier on the leads. It's like, at least in the first episode, who knows how it shakes out in the end. Brimsley and Agatha, they get like 25% of the episode, and then the rest is all Charlotte. And that's because George doesn't get like his big episode until later. But like Charlotte's screen time, once we do Queen Charlotte, it's gonna skyrocket. She was all over that show, and it was named after her. Benedict and Genevieve, Philip and Marina, Violet and Edmund. that screen time is just his death scene, so it feels a little grim. Then 35 seconds for Francesca and Michaela. They're pulling through. It's just for some reason so funny to me to have such major characters with like less than a minute of screen time, and it's because they were literally just barely introduced, but for some reason it amuses me. So here is the overview of season 1, the percentages of each category. You know, maybe I should have been doing this on 150% this whole time. Yeah, well, better late than never. About 22% of season 1 is composed of the leads together. About 34% of it is the leads apart, and about 42% of it is the supporting cast. And I suppose I could have a separate category here that is leads overall, mixing the first two categories, but you can sort of do that math on your own. This is definitely the season that's the heaviest on the leads overall, and you know, if it is going to be this recurring issue that every season people complain that the leads didn't get enough screen time, they start thinking about season 1, about how well put together that was, then I'm not saying that it is not like a valid complaint to have about the show. Like, it's totally reasonable to look at the pacing of a show and be like, this is when it worked and this is when it didn't work. If people think that this formula is stronger for the show than the one they seem to be going with now, then that's fine. Like, we can totally talk about the pacing and format and structure of Bridgerton. I would love to talk about that. I just don't love when the arguments come from the perspective of like fairness, when it's like Colin and Penelope only got this and they got this and this only got this, because I feel that's just whiny. No, mainly I just think that when people are coming at it from the perspective of fairness, they are often like really villainizing the people behind the show they supposedly love. Like, I am not fond of the way everybody's attacking the new showrunner right now, accusing her of being fatphobic or like trying to ruin Penelope and Colin's season by like snubbing them and all of this stuff. And it reminds me a lot of the backlash Shonda and Chris Van Dusen got last season, because I think it's different to have an analytical discussion about like the format of the show that you prefer and to like attack people and to like assume the worst. It's so weird too that it happens for a show like Bridgerton, because this is a show where every pairing is like guaranteed to have their moment in the sun and you know all of their end games. Like, I can't imagine a more peaceful setup. And it really confused me at first why there were so many like ship wars and arguments and all of this stuff. But I think the more I think about it, it does make sense that this structure, that this format would inspire competition and would inspire so much comparison and like arguments from fairness, because now I guess there's this feeling that characters who are going to have a season someday shouldn't be getting screen time because it's not their turn yet. Like, people are looking at Benedict now, like, just wait. And then when it comes to characters who will never really have their moment, people are just like, why would we care? I really don't like the way people are talking about the Mondriches this season. This is an ensemble show and like people, whatever. Actually, one more thing before we like, I don't know, go over the other seasons, just like my overall overarching argument for the show's format as it is, because like I said, we can talk about what format suits the show the best. I would still argue that I like it with a 50-50 split, essentially. 50% leads, whether that be together or apart, and 50% supporting cast, because I think it's good for the world to be expansive, first of all. I think I like subplots, first of all, but also good for the romance to have those, what would you call it, a reprieve? I don't know if it's just a me thing, but I like having to wait for it a little bit, having to yearn for it as the characters do, and to really feel the progression of time in their relations, because there are gaps between it. Actually, there's an anecdote about the first Final Destination movie that I like, which is that after a big famous death in that movie, they had to add like 30 seconds of seltzer water because test screening audiences were like reeling from the death scene. They couldn't like pay attention to the next thing going on, so they needed like a break. They just needed like a moment to chill. And there's actually a super comparable moment in Bridgerton season 2. Kate and Antony have one of their big like heated moments in the room, and then Daphne comes in and interrupts them. So then you cut before, you know, Daphne and Antony get in a fight about it to like a couple seconds of Daphne pouring herself a drink. And it reminds me so much of that. It's like you get these big like heated moments of intensity, and then you need a breather, you need to reflect on it, you need some time. And I like that expanse. I like that pace. I don't know. Anyway, on to the character distributions of season 1. Like I said, Daphne like is on her way to doubling Simon's screen time. That is not true of either of the upcoming seasons, that there is that much of a disparity between the leads. Antony is the third character here, and that adds up. I will say, I think it's true for every season that the third place character is a sibling that like causes external conflict for the couple. So you've got Antony trying to duel with Simon, you've got Edwina in a love triangle with them, and you've got Eloise, who's like in this conflict with Penelope. So I kind of like that. That's like the tried and true Bridgerton formula. Violet, Marina, again, like Marina was the 5th most present person in season 1. So it was just really interesting how like integral she was to the beginning of the show. And then like just got shipped off. Eloise, Penelope, Portia, Colin, Benedict, Agatha, Charlotte, Sienna, Will, Friedrich, Archibald, Genevieve, Nigel, Rose, Philippa, Prudence, Henry, Cressida, Mrs. Coulson, Hyacinth, Araminta, Mrs. Varley, Mrs. Wilson, Alice. Oh, there's more. Brimsley, Philip, Gregory, Francesca, George, Albion, Jeffries, and 15 seconds for Footman John. So then the pairings for season 1 are obviously led by Daphne and Simon, followed by Anthony and Sienna, Daphne and Friedrich, Colin and Marina, Colin and Penelope, Will and Alice, Benedict and Genevieve, Charlotte and George, Philip and Marina, Philippa and Albion. Let's remind ourselves what the overview for season 1 was. We'll just scroll back and forth a little here. 22% leads together in season 1, 17% leads together in season 2. So yes, a difference. Isn't that extreme of a difference? Debatable. It's debatable. 34% leads apart versus 37% leads apart. Now we're led by Anthony, but as you can see, there's only like an 8-minute difference between him and Kate, which is just way more equitable. This is all crooked. Way more equitable than my broke. Way more equitable than season 1, which I think makes for a better season. Anyway, we haven't gotten to season 3 yet, but I will say the record season 2 holds, even though it is the least heavy on the leads, it has the most equality between the leads in terms of screen time. But Anthony still takes it. Then Edwina, the most present third place character in a given season, which makes sense. She was she was super involved. She was like on the poster and all that. People really take issue with that, but I don't. Then Penelope. I think it's kind of season 2 that really pushes her to be the most present character overall, because I mean, obviously she's super present in her own season, but super present in another season as well. Eloise, Violet, Agatha, Portia, Colin, Jack, Benedict, Mary, Charlotte, Daphne, reduced role in season 2, Prudence, Genevieve, Theo, Gregory, Cressida, Hyacinth, Will, Thomas, Araminta, Mrs. Varley, Philippa, Edmund, Tessa, Brimsley, Francesca, George, Lord Cowper, Philip, Miss Wilson. Whoa, I didn't put a parentheses there. Alice, Albion, and 38 seconds for Footman John. I don't know why that's so funny to me. Anthony and Kate obviously take the lead with 81 minutes. Spoiler alert, I think it's something like 80 minutes for Penelope and Colin as well. So I think that's their tried and true method at this point, and I don't think that's bad at all. 80 minutes for a couple in a season is plenty. Anthony and Edwina, Portia and Jack, Colin and Penelope, Eloise and Theo, Kate and Thomas, Colin and Marina, Benedict and Tessa, Will and Alice, Charlotte and George, Philip and Marina, Violet and Edmund, Philippa and Albion, Benedict and Genevieve. Okay, season 3 overview. I don't like that this is split between the... It's split. 18% leads together compared to 17, compared to 22%. So this is actually interesting. Percentage-wise, 18 versus 17, Penelope and Colin take up more time together in their season, but just the flat value number, they have 1 minute less than Kate and Anthony. So that's a consequence of season 2 being longer. 32% leads apart and 49% supporting cast, which I think is the highest amount of supporting cast. So that goes to show like all of the differences that exist here. Kate and Anthony have the least time together, percentage wise, but Colin and Penelope have the least time as leads overall, and yet still over 50. So I think the fact that every season has more than 50% leads oriented, like, I think that's fair enough. I just don't think these differences are noteworthy enough to like cause fusses over in terms of fairness. We can criticize the format of the show overall. I like the format. I like subplots. I like it better when they're intertwined thematically with the main plot, but I like the expanse of the world. I like hearing from other characters. I like checking in with the Mondriches. But you just see how like it all sort of shakes out to be even. Like, this is the format of the show. Like, about 20% leads together, about 30% leads apart, and about like 40-something% supporting cast. Okay, characters in season 3. Penelope gets a decent amount more than Colin, so definitely less equal than season 2 between the leads. It is a little surprising. Penelope is the first non-Bridgerton sibling to outdo the Bridgerton sibling as the lead, and we'll probably end up talking about this when I properly review the season, the consequences that might have had for Colin's character, how well characterized he is, yada yada yada. That's a large part of the conversation surrounding the season. You could definitely tell during season 3 the emphasis that was put on Penelope, but I also think it's kind of fair enough because she's like, Lainey, whistle down, like that's a pretty major big deal. I don't know, she's just got more stuff to do. Eloise at 3, Perfect Sense, Violet, Francesca, Portia, Cressida, Benedict, Agatha, Charlotte, Kate, John, Prudence, Marcus, Anthony. Here's something interesting. Kate has more screen time than Anthony by like a minute. These are all like early 20s here. Will, Philippa, Alfred, Tilly, Alice, Araminta, Hyacinth, Harry, Gregory, Albion, Mrs. Varley, Paul, Brimsley, Genevieve, Lord Cowper, Mrs. Wilson, 49 seconds for Michaela, and 11 seconds for Footman John. Okay, pairings for season 3. Colin and Penelope at 80 minutes, 17 for Benedict and Tilly, Penelope and Alfred, Francesca and John, Anthony and Kate, Violet and Marcus, Will and Alice, Prudence and Harry, Philippa and Albion, Benedict and Paul, Tilly and Paul, Francesca and Michaela at 35 seconds. Okay, so that is it. Those were my numbers. I will link them in the description. This was the numbers update. I will review the season later.